He could have ended everything I built with one signature. Instead, Roman Ashby set the folder face down on the copper bar in the middle of my own derby launch party, looked at me across 200 people, and slid it toward me with 2 fingers. "This conversation," he said, "has to happen somewhere that isn't this room." My business partner Lena was 3 feet away. She grabbed my arm. I pulled away. I picked up the folder. The citation was there. Minor standard, exactly what he had described in January. And the signature line at the bottom was blank. Roman Ashby had been assigned to Copper Bend Distillery by the Alcohol and Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau after an anonymous tip alleged we were misclassifying a barrel-aged statement on our reserve label. A minor infraction, a standard resolution path that should have taken 3 days. Instead, he had been in my distillery for 11 weeks. The unsigned report was the last thing I expected from him tonight. His hand on my forearm, guiding me toward the back stairwell while the entire bourbon circuit watched, was the second to last. "Wilder," he said, "come on." I went. That is the thing I want to explain. Not the violation, not the folder, not why a federal inspection stretched to 11 weeks instead of 3. I want to explain why, when Roman Ashby said my name in a room full of people and reached for my arm, I didn't think twice about going. That requires going back to October. He arrived on a Tuesday with a federal ID badge, a laptop bag, and the expression of a man who planned to make this easy and fast. He shook my hand at the barrel house entrance, firm, brief, professional, and introduced himself as Officer Ashby with the kind of careful formality that signals, "I am here to do a job and not to become anyone's problem." "Standard inspection," he said, setting up at the copper tasting bar I'd offered as a workspace. "Production records, the reserve barrel log, label approval documentation, access to the aging warehouse. If everything's in order, I should be done by Thursday." "It'll be in order," I said. He looked up from his laptop. He had dark eyes and the particular stillness of someone who had learned to read rooms for something other than pleasure. Not unfriendly, just calibrated. He looked at me for exactly 1 second longer than the handshake required. "Mr. Cass," he said, "I'm sure it will be." Thursday came and went. The reserve barrel log had a discrepancy, not falsified, just inconsistently formatted across 2 entries from 3 years back, when I'd been running production alone after my co-founder left mid-build. Roman flagged it, issued a standard administrative notice, and said he'd need another week for the related records. A week became 3. 3 became 7. By the end of October, Roman Ashby had a permanent seat at my copper tasting bar, a coffee mug he'd started leaving there overnight, and a running disagreement with me about whether bourbon should be taken neat or over a single large ice, sphere that had become the most genuinely interesting argument I'd had with another person in 2 years. I am aware of how that sounds. Here is the honest version. I knew what was happening by the end of the 3rd week. I knew it, and I did not name it, because Roman Ashby was a federal officer with an open compliance file on my business, and I had not spent 4 years building Copper Bend to lose it to something I could control by keeping my mouth shut. I told myself it was professional respect. I told myself it was the quality of his company. I told myself that a serious conversation about Kentucky limestone water and grain character has nothing whatsoever to do with wanting to know what a man's face looks like when he is not performing professional distance. I told myself a lot of things between October and January. What actually happened? Roman stayed past his audit scope because the records genuinely required it. He was thorough in the way people are thorough when they care about doing something right, not punitive, not bureaucratic. He asked questions that were good questions. He noticed things about the operation that our own team had stopped seeing from familiarity, and twice he mentioned them, not as citations, but as casual observations, in the offhand way you mention something to a person whose work you respect. He also, as a completely separate matter, set his coffee down carefully so it didn't leave a ring on the copper. Apologized when he bumped my shoulder in a narrow doorway, went completely still when I was explaining something I loved, still in the way that makes you feel heard rather than studied. The Angels Share conversation happened in November. I need to tell you about it because Roman told me later at the party that he'd been thinking about it since the night it occurred. We were in the aging warehouse, low light, cold, the smell of white oak and caramel, and the first edge of winter coming through the ridge. And I was reading barrel stamps while he logged serial numbers. I explained the Angel's share, the 3% of bourbon that evaporates through the barrel every year, going up into the air. After 12 years, I said, you've lost a third of what you put in. To the air, Roman said, to the air. He was quiet. Then, that's a strange thing, losing something slowly and calling it a name like that. The distillers who named it were religious men, I said. They figured if something was leaving, it should be going somewhere. He wrote the serial number into his log. Then, very quietly, without looking at me, I've been here 8 weeks. I know, I said. The audit could have been done in 3. I said nothing. He said nothing. The warehouse was cold and dark beyond the flashlight's reach, and somewhere up on the ridge a winter bird called once and went quiet. He left that night without saying anything else. I stood in the warehouse for a long time after, with the cold and the dark and 30,000 gallons of bourbon aging in silence around me, and thought about things leaving slowly and the names we give them. January came in hard in Louisville. Ice on the Ohio, the horse farms going gray under low sky. Roman's compliance review was technically complete. He told me this in December, after the last audit session, and I said, "What happens now?" And he said, "I write the report. I file it. You have 30 days to respond." I nodded. He closed his laptop. Neither of us moved for 45 seconds, which in a small room is a very long time. He came back the next day, not officially. He said there were follow-up questions about the Q3 records. There were no follow-up questions about the Q3 records. I made coffee. He sat at the copper bar. We talked for 2 hours about something completely unrelated to the Q3 records. He left at dusk. This was the pattern for 3 weeks in January, and I let it happen because I am apparently a man who will accept whatever version of proximity is available and ask for nothing more specific, which is its own kind of cowardice I had not previously had occasion to examine. I did not know then that the unsigned report was already sitting in his laptop bag, that he had written it in December, signed everything except the bottom line, and was waiting for a moment that didn't exist yet. The Derby launch party was always the first Saturday in February. Copper Bend had hosted it 3 years running. 200 guests, industry contacts, press, the full spring bourbon circuit starting its engine. It was our biggest night. I had been planning it since September. 4 days before the party, Roman told me the report was finalized. He said it plainly, with the manner of someone delivering information rather than news. I said, "Okay." He said, "It's not as serious as the initial notice suggested." I said, "Thank you." He said quietly, with his eyes on his laptop, "You built something good here, Wilder." I said, "Thank you." He packed his bag. He left. The next 3 days were the kind of busy that protects you from things you don't want to think about, and I used them efficiently. By 8 o'clock, the barrel house was warm and loud and full. Distributors, journalists, the Kentucky Distillers Association crowd, Lena's friends from the racing world who drank everything like it was the first Saturday in May. I was working the bar, the thing I'm genuinely best at, moving between guests with the host's version of calm I'd spent 4 years learning. Roman arrived at 8:30. He was in a dark jacket instead of his field clothes, Federal, I'd not in evidence for the first time since October. He looked different outside of work, less calibrated, more present, like something he'd been holding back had been given permission to relax. He found me at the bar. He ordered a neat pour of the small batch reserve without asking what I'd recommend, because he already knew what I'd recommend. I poured it and set it in front of him, and our fingers were 2 inches apart on the copper bar, and I thought, this is the last night this looks like anything other than what it is. He reached into his jacket and set the folder on the bar. I looked at it. I looked at him. "You came to my party to hand me the report," I said. "I came to your party," he said, "because you've been the best part of my last 3 months, and I've spent 3 days trying to decide if there was an ethical way to say that before filing the document. There isn't. So I'm going to file it Monday and say it tonight and let you decide what to do with it." The room was loud around us, 200 people, and the whole bourbon circuit. Say what, Roman? He slid the folder toward me. Open it. I opened it. The citation was there. Minor, standard, one formatting correction, and a 30-day response. Exactly what he had described in December. And the signature line at the bottom was blank. You haven't filed it, I said. Not yet. His voice was steady. I needed you to know first that there's no leverage here, no condition. What I'm about to say has nothing to do with this document, and I need that to be clear before I say it. He looked at me. No calibration, no professional distance. I haven't been able to stop thinking about the Angel's Share conversation. The ice sphere argument. The way you explained limestone water to me like it was something worth caring about. I have been thinking about those things since November, and I am very tired of having something to say and no ethical moment to say it in. Lena made a sound beside me. I didn't look at her. Roman, I said. I know the timing is wrong, he said. I know this room is full of people. I know the file isn't signed. He put his hand flat on the copper bar, 3 inches from mine. I know all of that. I'm saying it anyway. I felt Lena's hand on my arm. I pulled away, gently, not unkindly, and put my hand over his on the copper bar. File the report Monday, I said. Tonight, you're just a man at my party. His hand turned under mine. His fingers found mine. In front of the Kentucky bourbon circuit, in front of Lena and the distributors and the 2 journalists I had personally invited, Roman Ashby held my hand across the copper bar and exhaled like a man who had been holding his breath since October. Okay, he said. Yeah, okay. He filed the report on Monday. Standard citation, 30-day response window. I corrected the label formatting, submitted the documentation, and the matter closed by the end of February, exactly as fast as it would have closed in October if the records had been straightforward. Lena reviewed the final citation and said, This is extremely minor, and you two are extremely dramatic. And I told her she was right on both counts. What I didn't tell her was the conversation after the party. We went to the barrel warehouse, because that was where the honest conversations always happened. Something about 30,000 gallons of patient silence makes the easy deflection seem embarrassing by comparison. The Angel's Share conversation, I said. That specific one. Since November, Roman said, the part where you said if something is leaving, it should be going somewhere. I was talking about bourbon. I know, he said. I wasn't. He was looking at the 12-year row, the oldest barrels in the house, the ones that had given up a third of themselves over time and were better for it, more concentrated, more themselves. I watched him look at them, and I thought about 11 weeks of slow accumulation. A coffee mug left overnight, conversation that had kept going long past its professional reason to exist. What were you talking about? I said. He turned. No distance. Nothing held back. The part of me that went quiet when I learned to do this job correctly, he said. The careful part. I thought it was gone clean. He reached out and traced the line of my jaw with 2 fingers, slow and deliberate, the way he checked a barrel stamp for legibility. Like accuracy mattered, like getting it right was worth the time. Turns out it was just waiting. I leaned into his hand, not metaphorically. I leaned, in the cold warehouse in February, into the warmth of his palm against my face, and I let the 11 weeks of distance collapse into this. 2 men at the end of a very long and careful distance, finally standing somewhere there was no professional reason not to stand. You have to drive back to Frankfurt eventually, I said. Yes, he said, and we figure out what comes after that. Together, he said, with the particular certainty of a man who has made a decision and does not need to perform it, slowly. Together. Outside, the February cold was sitting on the Ohio River basin the way it does before it breaks. Heavy, still, the sky the low white of something about to change. In the warehouse, the bourbon aged in silence around us. 200 barrels breathing in the dark, giving something up to the air year by year, becoming more themselves with every winter they stayed. His hand warm against my face. The Angel's Share rising through the oak into the cold Kentucky dark, going somewhere it had always been going. I stayed. So did he. If a man who could have walked away chose to stay instead, if that lands somewhere you recognize, I hope you'll stay with us too. We're a small channel building toward our first 1,000 subscribers. And stories like this one only find new ears because people like you stick around. Which moment got you? The blank signature line, the hand on the copper bar, or the warehouse at the end? Tell us below. And if you haven't subscribed yet, it costs nothing and means everything.